Welcome everybody to this webinar on Hindutva pop that we're going to listen to today. My name is Thomas Blom Hansen. I am a professor of anthropology here at Stanford University. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Stanford campus is located within the traditional and unceded territory of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. Today we are joined by Kunal Purohit, who is a journalist. He's been a journalist for over 13 years, writing on issues of development, politics, inequalities, gender, and the intersections between them. He's an independent journalist and has, in the recent past, reported on issues like the country's agrarian crisis, developmental inequities in some of India's poorest areas, as well as in hate crimes and the rise of Hindu nationalism across the country, something we're going to hear more about today. Kunal is an alumnus of SOAS at the University of London. He's received many awards, among them the Ramnath Goenka Award for Excellence in Civic Journalism, the Statesman Award for Rural Reporting, and others. His work has been featured in Hindustan Times, Al Jazeera, South China Morning Post, Deutsche Welle, The Wire, and many other outlets. So today, Kunal will speak to us about the secretive world of Hindutva pop stars, something that is very topical and something we see unfolding at this very moment of great tension in South Asia. So Kunal, over to you. Welcome, and thanks for making time for share your work with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you, Lalita. Thank you, Manar. Thank you, all of you who've joined in. It is an honor and a pleasure to be with you guys, even though I'm not physically there. I was in the States in November, and I remember driving past and driving into the campus, in fact, with a friend, and it seemed like a lovely, beautiful campus, and I wish I was actually around with you guys while we discussed this, but you know, one way or the other, I'm glad that I'm here. Firstly, apologies if I don't look like I'm as fresh as all of you, because this is my bedtime. I am generally in bed by this time, so I have some black coffee with me, and I'm going to be trying to make it as interesting and as exciting in some ways as possible, because we were just discussing before we started that this is a grim time for all of us in India, for all of us in South Asia. And I want to try and maybe tell you a bit more about how just how grim things really stand. So whenever we are ready, we could maybe start with a bit of a presentation that I've made for you guys, where essentially, as a journalist, I want to tell you my story. I want to tell you the story of the book that we're here to discuss, which is the book that I wrote traveling across 7 different states of India for about 4 years. And the book, as you can see on your screen, hopefully, is called H-pop, and it's essentially looking at how popular culture, something that we've always thought to be very benign, thought to be something that is meant to be a break from reality, something that is always meant to entertain you, is actually, in the context of India and its diasporic audiences abroad, is actually turning out to be a very, very dangerous weapon that is not just radicalizing but also normalizing hate and bigotry. And then, as I said, I've been a journalist all my life, and I want to try and take you through the story that I uncovered while I was writing this book, and the story of how the book also came along. So if we can go to the next slide, Lalita. I mean, essentially, as Thomas said, I've studied in London, and this was around 2016 or so when I went, and I'd already worked for about 8-10 years in the Indian media. And when I went away to London, when I was like some of you, a student at SOAS, doing my masters and looking at India from the outside, there was something disturbing that had started happening in India. And for all of you who know the history of the subcontinent, you know that communal clashes between Hindus and Muslims is not new. It's sometimes barely anything that even makes the headlines. And yet, what I started noticing was that there was a distinct difference in the way that history of animosity was now playing out. I come from Mumbai, and we've seen the ghastly riots of December 1992 and 93, just after the Babri Masjid was demolished by Hindu right-wing organizations. And we've seen what communal clashes, and we've seen what violence between religions means. It's essentially always, been the case that it's a clash between two groups mostly, right? It's two groups from differing faiths, from different ideologies, clashing and resulting in violence and loss, and the loss of lives and property and so on. Except what we started seeing, exactly a decade ago from now, was that the violence was taking a different shape. It was not violence which was targeting one group. It was still violence by one group, except that it was targeting individuals. It was targeting maybe a smaller group of people. It wasn't two massive groups clashing with each other. It wasn't hundreds of people hitting the streets. It used to be, even when it was a group of people, it used to be 8 or 10 people. Except this time, they knew exactly who their victims were, because the people they were attacking were largely people from Muslims, from sometimes Christian backgrounds and faiths, sometimes Dalits, and sometimes other lower castes. And the people who were attacking them were essentially people who were foot soldiers of the Hindu nationalist, of the Hindutva movement in India. And the difference that I saw in this new form of communalism that was emerging was that, these were essentially people, as I said, the people that they knew. So sometimes it would be, a small group of people going and lynching someone who they had grown up with, right? Sometimes it would be a neighbor, sometimes it would be a friend, sometimes it would be a childhood sort of buddy of yours who you grew up with, who you went to school, who you played with. And then, you grow up and realize that you are from different religions, and there comes a point when the radicalization is just so much that it tips over and results in violence. And so when this new form of communalism started happening, what came up, and some of you might remember this, what started showing up on our screens were these series of lynchings, these hate crimes, these targeted sort of hate crimes, where individuals were being targeted across the country. They were being lynched, like we've seen in centuries ago in the US and other parts of the world. People were lynching, people of Muslim and Christian religions, especially. And when I started noticing who these people were, or who these people were targeting, as I said, they were always people who knew each other, right? And so, as a journalist, this troubled me, because I wanted to understand what had changed. What was it that was bringing this new form of communalism up, where people were very happy to disregard, decades old friendships and neighbors and social relations, and only focus on the religious identity of the person that they were attacking, or the person that they felt immense hatred for. And so, as a part of my desire to understand what was happening, I did what every journalist, wants to do, which is to hit the ground running. And so what I started doing was, much after these instances had happened, sometimes, a few months, sometimes a year, or even longer after a hate crime had happened, I would end up visiting that place, and I would end up meeting not just the victims of those hate crimes, or the family members if the victims weren't alive, but I would also meet the assailants. I would also meet the people who were accused of the lynchings. I would also try and meet local cops. I would meet lawyers, just to try and understand what was it that was changing my country from within. And so a quest like this brought me to this small town. And Lalita, if we can have the next slide. This small town is in a place called Jharkhand, which is, for those of you who don't know, is in the eastern part of India. This state called Jharkhand, and in Gumla, which is again a small town that you possibly never hear of if you're not familiar with it already. Um, there was a hate crime that occurred one fine day, and my idea was to try and go down and try and understand what had happened, right? Try and understand why the hate crime had happened. Um, The hate crime happened many years ago. This was 2018 when the hate crime happened, and then when I traveled there, what I realized was that there was something that was very different about this hate crime, as against all of the others that I had already looked at. And the difference was that there was something that this hate crime had to do with music that was being played. This hate crime occurred on the day of Ram Navami, which is essentially the day that Hindus celebrate the birth of Lord Ram. And typically, what happens is there are massive sort of processions that are taken out by Hindus on this day, especially in a state like Jharkhand, because it is possibly Jharkhand's biggest festival. And Lalita, if you can have the next slide to show people how big these processions can be. Yeah, so if you can play the video, this is what a procession in a
All
place like
right,
Jharkhand
let me
looks like.
see. Everybody's hands up in the air and clap, clap, and clap, clap, clap.
Now, the idea typically always is that processions like these would start from one part of the town. They would snake their way across different localities. They would go to Hindu localities. They would go to localities where there were predominantly Muslims who stayed. And then they would typically end at a Ram temple or at an auspicious sort of spot that had been decided by the Hindus. And these are, thousands of people, sometimes tens of thousands of people making their way across town. Now, in Gumla, every year, this procession was a given. It was the big event of the year for that town. And what would essentially happen is that Gumla had a beautiful syncretic tradition where the Hindus would take out this procession, and when they would snake their way across the Muslim localities, they would also pass a Jama Masjid. They would pass the main mosque of the town. And when they would do that, the local Muslims would come out and the procession would halt for a few moments. Beautifully, the Muslims would come out, they would offer sort of refreshments to the Hindu processionists. Some people would shower petals on them. And it was this beautiful moment of coexistence in Gumla every single year. Except that year, when the hate crime happened, the nature of this procession changed as soon as it entered that lane where that Jama Masjid, where the main mosque of Gumla is. And when I try to understand from eyewitnesses, because I was going a year after the incident, so when I tried to understand what had happened, some people started telling me that, as soon as the procession entered their lane where the mosque was, there was something different about the energy, right? There were suddenly these very, very aggressive and boisterous boys in the procession. They started sort of chanting very aggressive Hindu slogans. Um, these processionists also carry arms, so they often carry sort of swords and knives and all kinds of things, because Ramnavami is also the day when you worship force. It's called Shakti Puja in Hindi. So typically they're always carrying these, but on a day like that, when they were already so aggressive, uh, that group of Hindu revelers who were entering that lane suddenly started looking like a mob, right? And they became a mob in that moment, and the closer and closer they got to the mosque, the anticipation rose that this could result in a riot, because here were thousands of Hindu men, clearly very, very boisterous, with arms, with different kinds of weapons, and clearly feeling like that they wanted to attack. They wanted to attack somebody. They wanted to take somebody down. And so when I tried understanding what had happened, a couple of people who were eyewitnesses started remembering exactly what happened, and essentially, what had changed was the minute the procession entered their lane, the music in the procession changed, right? From whatever else they were playing, which was essentially techno sounds and the kind of music that you just heard, the music of the procession changed, and in came a song whose words told the Hindu processionists that the skull cap of the Muslim must be knocked off his head, right? And when they heard that, it was almost as if someone had switched on sort of the energy of that procession. And so suddenly all of these thousands of men were galvanized. and galvanized to action in some ways, right? Because they started waving their swords. So as they went closer and closer, the local Muslims sort of started pouring out on the streets because they anticipated that something was off. Now, thankfully, before anything could happen, the cops swung in. And for anybody who's seen half as many as Hindi films that I have growing up, it's surprising that the cops swung in before anything could happen. But that's precisely what happened. The cops swung in before anything else could take place, and they quickly turned off the music. They cancelled that beautiful ritual that they would generally have, the Hindus and the Muslims, and they had to separate the two communities by force, right? And they switched off the music, and they hurriedly told the procession to quickly clear the way and go away from the mosque. So nothing happened essentially, and yet when I heard all of this, I was stunned because this was the first time that I was ever listening to an account which was telling me that it was not hateful speech, it was not slogans, it was music that had almost nearly led to a riot breaking out. And so I say this in my book as well because that's the night this book essentially was born, and that's when I started this journey of wanting to understand what these songs were, because I was, as I said, I was blown away. I'd never heard of any of this before, and so that night I went back and I googled the hell out of my phone, kept looking at what this song could have been, and what I found instead was an entire galaxy of such songs, right? Not one, but many, many songs, which were essentially doing this, which were essentially taking the Hindutva ideology, taking the very core rabid elements of it, um, and beautifully packaging them into these songs, right? And sort of making them seem very normal. So normalizing it and legitimizing it, but also making it very, very, very attractive as a proposition and very, very accessible to people, because as soon as they turned into music, this music was no longer, listening to this music was no longer a political act. It was an act of sort of just being wanting to entertain, or listening to pop culture, right? As anybody would. It just became a very accessible form of consuming Hindutva propaganda. And so that essentially is how the journey started, and unfortunately, that was 6 years ago, and now that galaxy of songs that I spoke about has just grown multifold, and I want to show you some examples as we go ahead. Lalita, if you could go ahead. This is the kind of stuff that is now coming out. These are just some examples of the songs that now make up this world of Hindutva pop culture. Songs which 5 years ago, when India had a terrible terror attack in Pulwama in 2019, a song which essentially told you that the terror attack shouldn't be blamed on terrorists, but we should be blaming it on Indian Muslims. And it's eerily similar to what we're seeing now in India, and I'll come to that in a minute. To songs which essentially, sort of talk of India's Mughal history in a very disparaging manner, right? And constantly equate India's Muslims to that Mughal history, and speak of both in a very, very derogatory fashion, to songs that are extremely hyper nationalistic, and speak of India's Islamic neighbors in very abusive fashion, to songs which target India's opposition parties, right? So everyone except the BJP is targeted by these songs, and these songs constantly seek to disparage India's politicians, and sometimes women politicians, in very gendered and sexist undertones that these songs have, to the songs that very directly speak of Muslims and directly speak of the language of subjugating the Muslims, as the last one, the bottom right one that you can see, which is a song which essentially says "Topi wala sar jhuka ke Jai Shri Ram bolega," which essentially translates to those wearing skull caps will be forced to bow down and say Jai Shri Ram. And for those of you who didn't get the subtlety of the message, the thumbnail also contains images of Muslims with hands folded and with when them praying and so on. So So this is essentially a glimpse of that world that I spoke about, the Hindutva pop world that I spoke about. This unfortunately is not just in, these thumbnails might make you feel like it, but it's now no longer just an online phenomena. I started tracking it in 6 years ago in a Ram Navami event in a small town in Jharkhand, and what has now happened is it has crossed various barriers that I thought it had in front of it, right? Which was the barrier of the geographical divide in India. So I would naively sometimes think that this was going to be a rural phenomena. This was something that would work in a rural Jharkhand, in rural Uttar Pradesh, and so on. This would never hit the urban cities of Mumbai, of Delhi, and of Bangalore, and so on. The other naive assumption that I had was that this was going to be an online phenomena, right? Where all of the people would just consume these songs online, and this would just become one of those rabbit holes that we would end up going into. And both of these assumptions have been wrong. The third assumption that I naively made, and sometimes people still naively make, is that this consumption of this pop culture is restricted to a certain class of people. That there's a class barrier which inhibits these songs from breaking out. And you'll see in a moment how even that is now sort of fallen apart. And I want to show you examples of how these songs are weaponized in the context of India at this point in 2025. So if we can go forward, Lalita. This is last month. These are videos that I recorded, and for those of you who are familiar, this is Andheri, which is really the heart of Mumbai. This is where the biggest business houses have their headquarters. This is where the international airport is. And the video that you're about to see is a video that I recorded just outside the international airport. And so when you see this, remember the assumptions that I told you I had naively made about what H pop was, and who it was reaching, right? So if we can just play this video, Lalita. Yeah, the next one. So essentially, this is the kind of spectacle H pop now is very clearly a part of. That essentially each time, a Hindu procession, which is most often sort of organized and orchestrated by Hindutva groups and by Hindu right-wing groups, each time such a procession takes place, these songs come up on cue. And then what I'm not sure you're able to get is just the extent of the number of people who in these processions sing along when these songs come up, right? When I went to this particular procession in Mumbai, I was stunned at the number of people who knew exactly these words, and there are multiple songs that I recorded, but who knew the words of each of these songs, and they were singing along as if it's a festival, it's a music festival, it's a music concert. They were there to enjoy the music, they were dancing with it. And that's the kind of normalization that I want to really sort of highlight when I talk about H pop, because essentially that is what popular culture, which is designed in this way, makes possible. It's that normalization, it's that sort of creeping very easily into spaces where you otherwise wouldn't receive a political message. It's in your living rooms, it's in your cars when you're driving. It's played in public buses in India when they're going long distances. It's played at corner shops. So it's that easy access, as I say, to its prey that makes H pop such a dangerous tool in the hands of people. And yet, when I started looking at the weaponization of popular culture, I realized that music wasn't the only thing. There were other pieces in the puzzle that were doing something similar, that were using popular culture and creating new subgenres of Hindutvaization, right? And if we can go to the next slide, I want to show you the next subgenre of popular culture. As I said, I mean, this is essentially what I was telling you about, that this has now become a spectacle and a template. And Lalita, we can just keep sort of going past, because these are just some headlines that have collated from different parts of India, just to show you that this is no longer about one particular part of India. This is no longer about, about the north of India. This is no longer about central India or East India. This is essentially everywhere. This has now become a phenomena where H-pop is played in all of these different processions, and often with strikingly similar consequences, right? Which are tensions or violence, or sometimes much worse, killings, and so on. So if you can go on to the next slide, Lalita. This is the next subgenre of pop culture that I look at in my book, which is the use of books, again, as a tool to disseminate Hindutva propaganda, to normalize it, to legitimize it, and to be able to reach audiences that maybe somehow you wouldn't be able to reach otherwise, right? Books have emerged as a very, very great tool, only because they make so much of this sound so credible, right? For those of you who don't know, the first book on the left is a book that essentially makes the argument, and makes it in a very compelling fashion over 200 pages, is the argument that the Red Fort in Agra, many of you would have heard of it, is not a red fort. It's not really, it has nothing to do with Mughal architecture. It's essentially a Hindu temple, which is what lies underneath. And as kooky as some of this may sometimes sound, and I think people often dismiss this to be kooky, what happens is, when propaganda like this continuously circulates, it transforms these myths into facts. So as we speak, there are multiple litigations that have very recently come up in different parts of the country about similar structures, similar Islamic structures, where Hindus have taken some of these myths and conspiracies to be facts, and have petitioned the court, saying, we want to dig up these mosques, we want to dig up these places of worship, because we believe there's a temple down underneath. So that's the kind of stuff that the books like these sometimes peddle. The second book that you see is again a very, very common conspiracy, and the book legitimizes it. This conspiracy called Love Jihad. For those of you who don't know, it's essentially this conspiracy among Hindu right wing activists and organizations, that there is a pan-Islamic conspiracy against Hindus, and the conspiracy essentially says that Muslim men must lure Hindu women, and must, sort of marry them and convert them to Islam, so that you can break the number of Hindus in the country down to a minimum, and that Islam can then be the dominant religion of India. So this book sort of does a job of trying to legitimize it, and as someone who's been on the ground, I can tell you that there's very little data to back up most of what this book says. Similar is the case quickly with the third book, which is a book which is not a new book, but it's a book that is currently in heavy circulation. A book that has for years made the argument that Hindus in Bangladesh have been systematically targeted, and there's been a genocide that is happening. In my book, I try to fact check some of the stuff that's in the book, and of course, it's very easy to debunk a lot of what it says, because it's not factually based. Similarly, the fourth book also, talks of different aggressors, different enemies that India and Hindus have, and these enemies range from communism to Islam to the church to the media, right? And this book does again a very credible job of presenting all of this to be a fact. Next, Lalita, I mean, I realize I'm also running out of time, so I'm going to rush up a bit. This is the third, subgenre of pop culture that I look at, which is the genre of poetry. Now, for those of you who are familiar with India, and with especially the northern part of India, we've always seen, poetry recitals, or as we call them, Kavi Sammelans, to be a form of mass entertainment. For decades now, it's been a very, very popular form of entertainment, where hundreds and sometimes thousands of people go and listen to poets reciting poetry. What has happened in the last few years is that even in that space, there has emerged a new category of poets, and these poets, I call them Hindutva poets, because they essentially speak Hindutva lines and Hindutva propaganda, but they convert them into poems and limericks and so on. And then they go and perform these poems on stage in front of hundreds and thousands of people. The same poems then become, as you will see in a moment, they become reels, they become YouTube shorts, and they become content for the vast Hindutva ecosystem that we are constantly seeing. And what all of these three, what music, what poetry, and what books do is they do such a good job at very selectively taking on things from the past, using the present, and sort of mixing the two together to try and paint a very grim picture of what the future will look like for India and for Hindus, if the Hindus don't pay heed to what the Hindutva organizations are saying. And that is why I want you to see this video, because it does a fine job at explaining exactly that.
गांधी जी का प्रेम अमर था। वाह। गांधी जी का प्रेम अमर था केवल चांद सितारे से। वाह। उसका फल हम सबने पाया भारत के बंटवारे से। अगर गोडसे की गोली उतरी ना होती सीने में, अगर गोडसे की गोली उतरी ना होती सीने में, अगर गोडसे की गोली उतरी ना होती सीने में, हर हिंदू पढ़ता नमाज फिर मक्का और मदीने।
You'd be shocked at how popular that reel is. This narrative, these visuals, this music, the meme format that I'm sure a lot of you could relate to, it makes it a very compelling reel, and you'd be surprised at just how many millions of hits this particular reel has had, and multiple people have posted this reel. And this reel has had some sort of very dangerous consequences that I might get the chance to talk about. But before that, I want to take you back to Gumla, that small town that I told you I went to. And if you remember, I told you that I was there to cover a hate crime. But I also told you that a riot almost took place, and the police intervened, right? I told you that the police swiftly sort of separated the two groups, and nothing happened. And yet that is just a part of the story. Essentially, what happens is when the Ram Navami procession is rushed across, and is told to go ahead from the mosque, the procession keeps going ahead, and it finally goes to its final destination, which is a temple in Gumla. And from there, the procession sort of disperses, and the processionists then are sort of walking back and going to their own homes. When some of them are walking back about 2 or 3 kilometers away from this spot, from that Jama Masjid spot that I told you about, when some of them are walking back, they see this young man, and Lalita, if you can go to the next slide, they see this young man, Mohammed Shalik. He's talking to a girl friend of his, right? A woman who's a friend, um, and they see him, and they see that they're both on the side of the road. They're talking like two friends would. And what they see is not two friends talking. What they see is not two 20-year-olds hanging out. What they see and what they do is that they see that this is the guy that they know. This is a Muslim guy. And they know him because some of them have been in school with him. Some of them have gone to his shop that his father owns. His father owns a textile shop in the middle of Gumla. So when they see them, they remember his Muslim identity, and they see the girl for her Hindu identity. And so when they see them, they see that this is love jihad. They see that this is a Muslim guy who is trying to lure the Hindu girl away and slowly convert her into Islam. And so they remember what they had just heard in the procession. They had heard songs about how they needed to attack men like Muhammad Shalik. They remember the kind of rhetoric that the songs used about Muslims, about how they were enemies, how they were trying to lure Hindu women. And so what they do is that they drag Muhammad Shalik out of that conversation. They drag him to the other side of the road, and they tie him up to an electric pole, and they flog him and flog him and flog him till he falls dead. And that is the hate crime that I had gone to cover in Gumla. Except that, in all of the reporting of the hate crime around Mohammed Shalik's killing, nobody had mentioned the fact that till just 2 hours ago, the people who killed Mohammed Shalik in cold-blooded, in what was a cold-blooded murder, were dancing and swaying to beats, were dancing away at these songs, were singing along and enjoying themselves in this procession, right? What happened in those 2 hours that from dancing and swaying and singing, they wanted to kill a guy who they had gone to school with, and a guy who they've known for years and years. And so, that is why I said in the beginning that this is the night that the book was born, because I couldn't go back and sleep that night. And I sort of, Mohammed Shalik's eyes haunted me because I carried this photo with me in my phone. And then, it just made me feel like there was something that I had to investigate, which was, how was it that songs were able to drive such mad passions and drive different communities apart, and cause riots and cause lynchings like these, right? And I know that, academically, one often sort of thinks of causality and correlations in two different ways, but there was something here that was contributing to the violence. And that is what I really sort of did want to investigate. And that is essentially, the story of this book. If we can go forward, Lalita. This is, yeah, just a second, yeah. I mentioned at the start that, that song around Pulwama terror attack is eerily similar to what we're seeing. For those of you who've not seen, for those of you who have, um, in the last few days, India's faced another brutal terror attack. It's a ghastly terror attack carried out by terrorists who came into the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir, and shot in cold-blooded murder, shot 26 different people who were innocent civilians out there to have a vacation, or were working as pony riders and so on. And and then what happened was that these were all terrorists who essentially, according to eyewitnesses, asked people their religion, and decided to selectively kill those who were Hindus, right? And they let go of some Muslims only because they were Muslims, except that there were also Muslims who were killed because they were trying to protect the Hindus. But that's a different story. And so what has happened in the interim is that, the day the terror attack happens, which is the 22nd of April, um, within a few hours, so by the morning of the 23rd, which is the next day, in less than 24 hours, I see a very similar brand of Hindutva pop music coming up, and they're all essentially saying exactly the same thing. They're all essentially trying to remind the Hindu audiences that the terrorists targeted Hindus, and this is essentially what Muslims around you are also going to one day do, which is that they're going to target you because you're not a Muslim yet. So all of these songs try to weaponize the terror attack and try to drive a wedge between the Hindus and Muslims at a time when the country was in mourning, right? At a time when all of us were shocked and stunned, and were heartbroken at the fact that, such a horrible tragedy could take place. This was exactly the moment when a score of songs came out with the exact same messaging. So, as you see, one of the songs, the kind of imagery that they're using, for those of you who can't read Hindi, the top left song, the thumbnail, essentially is reminding, with the imagery of a man lying in a blood of pool with his wife next to him, is essentially reminding the Hindu audience of what the terrorist said, which is that you are a Hindu, right? And that's the messaging that this song has, that if you're a Hindu, this is the fate that is going to await you. The second song that you can see, the bottom of it, is a song that essentially calls for not just the terror attack to be avenged, but for the snakes, quote unquote snakes inside India, to be taught a lesson and for them to be crushed. And so a lot of these songs also operate with these codes, which are very popular among the Hindu right wing, which is, using words like snakes for Muslims and so on. So sometimes they're green snakes and whatnot, right? So this is one example of a song that came out. One more, Lalita, if you can just go forward. There's one, yeah, and there's this example. Sorry, go if you can go back. One more. Yeah. So the last one is actually by the same singer who had sung that song about Pulwama, the thumbnail that I showed you at the start. And she's now come out with a song which is essentially telling Hindus that, enough of you being secular, enough of you wanting to be friends and be brotherly with these Muslims, because this is what these Muslims are essentially going to do. And it addresses the Muslims by saying that, why didn't you leave the country when India was partitioned into India and Pakistan, and that you've got a separate country of your own, you should be thrown out, and that Hindus made a mistake by letting you stay on, right? That's the kind of rhetoric that this song has. And so the article that you see, the headline that you see, is an article that I wrote for Al Jazeera, where I counted at least 20 such songs, essentially all of them bringing the same message out. The message that Hindus are basically awaiting a similar fate if they continue to be friends with Muslims and continue to believe that there is a chance of a friendship and brotherhood that Hindus and Muslims can arrive at. And all of these songs, in some form or the other, advocate a form of violence against Muslims. So, it can be direct violence, it can also be economic boycotts and so on. And I must add that what has happened in the aftermath is that, for days and days now, it's been over a week since the terror attack. We've seen dozens of instances where Muslims in different parts of the country have been attacked, have been assaulted. There have been dozens of hate speeches against them. So what we're seeing is a very grim situation where we're seeing a possible war-like situation emerge between India and Pakistan. But even in India, there is a group of people that is very keen to drive a wedge between different communities right now and weaponize this very somber moment. And assisting them in their design is Hindutva pop music. And that is what makes it such a dangerous tool. If we can go ahead. As I said, right, I mean, it is essentially everywhere. I mean, H-pop, I told you I started off with certain assumptions about H-pop, but Hindutva pop music is now on the streets of Mumbai, outside Mumbai's airports. It's now in every Hindu festival. It's now being played in homes. It's now in college festivals. It's essentially everywhere. And the first example that you're going to see is of a reel made by a kid on social media. Yeah.
इनकी मनसा का अब तो पता चल गया ही होगा जब घर में घुस के मारेंगे क्या तब एहसास तुम्हें होगा आँख खोल जल्दी देखो दूर करो अंधियारों को मानवता के हत्यारों को करो बाहर गद्दारों को
That song is a song called Love Jihad, and that message is essentially targeting Muslims, right? And that kid is lip syncing to that song. So think of the parent who shot that reel. Think of what the kid herself is going to be thinking about when she thinks of this song. This is from the Cricket World Cup that happened a couple of years ago, and as a distraught cricket fan who couldn't afford tickets to the World Cup because they were so expensive. Just think of the fact that these are some of the richest people in India gathering to watch the Cricket World Cup match. And the song that they choose to sing is a song that essentially envisions India to be a Hindu Rashtra, to be a Hindu country. Yeah. Just a second. Okay, just a bit of a quiz for those of you who are familiar with Indian music. If you can identify that singer in the video, I assure you that if you can identify him, it will be a bit of a heartbreak for you to see this video. Lalita, sorry, if we could just go back. Oh, go back, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if any of you managed to guess who that cute, cuddly figure in the center is, but that's essentially Shankar Mahadevan, a very famous singer in India and abroad, among diasporic audiences, and the fact that this guy has thousands of songs possibly under his belt, most of his songs are chart busters, and he still chooses to go to a concert and sing a Hindutva pop song. And this concert was held, in Mumbai. I mean, it was in a city called Thane, which is a part of the Mumbai metropolitan region. The fact that he chooses to sing this song should tell you a lot about the popularity that this song has, and then these songs generally have, and the appeal that it also then has on quote unquote mainstream artists to become a part of this Hindutva pop movement. Yeah, if you can just go to the last slide. The reason why I wrote this book was that incident I told you in Gumla, and it's been 6 years since then. But what I have essentially seen over all of these 6 years, what I've essentially seen happen in my country is that we've moved on from that form of communalism, that I first described to you, right? Which was that big groups would clash with each other. There'd be riots on the streets, and things would be shut down for days and days, and it would be the headlines. We moved on to a form of communalism where you were essentially targeting individuals and lynching them, like the men who lynched Mohammed Shalik, like so many other lynchings we've seen in India. We've now come to a point which is slightly different, which is that uh, we've now reached that point of radicalization in India, where there has been so much effort to radicalize people into believing that the real enemies and the real problems that India and Hindus have are Muslims, and that Muslims are carrying with them various conspiracies, and that they are existential threats to Hindus in India. And so these narratives have been so forcefully fed over the last decade or so, that we've reached a point now, my friends, where people who have nothing to do with any political party, they have nothing to do with the BJP, they have nothing to do with the RSS, they have nothing to do with Hindu right-wing groups, but they're so radicalized that they believe in taking matters in their own hands, and sort of acting on that hate that is building up on them. And what you're seeing are four examples of exactly that. In the first instance, a group of men who were coming to Mumbai to become cops, who were coming to Mumbai essentially to appear in examinations and interviews where they were going to be selected as policemen in Mumbai. But when they see a Muslim man sharing, a railway coach with them, they target him and they search his bag, and when they find meat on him, they believe that it is cow meat, and they nearly lynch him, right? And they capture all of this on video. In the second instance, a teacher, right, a teacher whose job is to teach children, to imbibe the right values and culture in them, is in that horrific video, she's seen to be dragging a Muslim kid out, and placing him in the center of the classroom, and then asking each Hindu boy and girl to come and line up and hit that Muslim boy while she delivers a hate speech about Muslims. And she again had no affiliation to any political party, right? these two more instances where a group of people who were essentially doing charity outside the largest cancer hospital in India, which is the Tata Memorial Hospital, when they see a woman in a who's covered her face with a veil, when they see her, she's wearing a burqa, and when they see her, they say that she needs to first chant Jai Shri Ram before they give her food. That is the kind of hate that I'm talking about. And again, they're not people affiliated to any organization. And similarly, people who are middle class, upper middle class people living in a housing colony in Gujarat's Baroda, turning out on the streets, hitting the streets only and only because the government, in a form of sort of affirmative action, decided to allot a house in that complex to a Muslim family. And just because they did not want to stay with a Muslim, they all hit the streets and they protested and protested, right? And of course, apart from all of this, what we are seeing now after the Pahalgam attack, where we in India have faced so many different terror attacks, and yet we've never seen a reaction like this, where where be it Pulwama, be it Pahalgam, we are Hindus are turning out, and they're wanting to declare sort of these boycotts of Muslims, or they want to hound Kashmiri Muslims, and two Muslims have been killed in the last few days in these hate instances. We've never seen anything like this, and which is why I essentially believe that popular culture has allowed that level of radicalization to seep in so seamlessly and integrate itself with everyday life, that radicalization is no longer a political process. It's no longer a process that is distinct and it stands out. It's not as though they're going to a political rally and consuming hate. It's that hate is coming to them and following them wherever they go, in the form of songs, in the form of poetry, in the form of books. And that essentially is what my book talks about. And I'm going to end here, but I hope we're able to have a conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Kunal. This is great. I look forward to reading your book. And thank you for sharing this. So there are lots of questions, and I invite the audience to also submit questions in the Q&A that you can see on your screen. I just want to kick it off maybe by asking you one that's kind of maybe the most obvious question that lots of people will have, which is you describe it as a process of your discovery of this phenomenon. So from your work, are you able to, this is new in terms of its dissemination on social media, obviously. These are people who are known, who publish, I suppose, their songs or drop them on YouTube and so on and so forth, right? But have you got any sense of how old this is? I mean, I'm asking because at one level, the sort of the fundamental thing about enjoyment being a sort of factor in how these forms of mobilizations are made is not new. It used to be maybe you could go to a rally and enjoy the company of others and laugh at the same forms of abuse or speeches or whatever. And you could go to these processions, as you say, this sort of stopping in front of a mosque, and you going back to the colonial age, the regulations and examples of where the cops would stop music or stop processions because they stop in front of a mosque for a long time to, in a sense, provoke Muslims and so on. So some of it has been around for a long time, but do you see this as a kind of, there's obviously a kind of magnification of this and a sort of higher degree of circulation, and it's everywhere and it's accessible via social media. But do you see this as something that's really taken off, or a sort of an entirely new form that didn't exist before, let's say 6 or 7 or 10 years ago?
No, I mean, Thomas, you'd know this, and you'd know this better than me, that even when the Ram Janmabhoomi movement was taking place, we saw the use of music, we saw the use of slogans, we saw the use of poetry and rhymes, and my book makes mention of all of that. I think what we're seeing now in this time is something very different, which is that the scale of the production of these songs, right? The number of songs that are now being produced, the speed at which they're being produced using the internet and modern technology and tools, and the patronage that it's been getting, the mainstreaming that it has seen, all of this make it, give it a bit of a distinct break from all of the past experiments. And some of the songs that I've seen, some of the earliest versions of H pop, in fact, that are still, at least that are available on the internet, will date back to the early part of the 2000s and 2010s and so on. What was happening then were one of instances or examples of someone wanting to convert a popular slogan or a catchphrase, like "Mandir wahi banayenge," and then there is this whole legion of poetry and songs on it. So catchphrases like those would be caught on, and there'd be some music around it, and then there'd be a lull. What we are now seeing, Thomas, is that now it's a bit like a well-oiled machine that is constantly churning out sort of these songs. As I said, Pahalgam happens, within 24 hours there are songs on it. Each time, the Waqf board mobilization that we recently saw in India, there were multiple songs that were on it. There's a case that happens in which is in the news where a Muslim man attacks and kills his Hindu girlfriend. The next day or a couple of days later, there are a number of songs on it. So the quick response that this pop culture has, and the different sort of ways in which it's been made possible, is what gives it a distinct edge from what we had seen before, which was much more sporadic, much more sort of infrequent use of music as a form of mobilization and radicalization. I think we're seeing now, and as I said, the patronage now is unparalleled, because in many cases what you see is the BJP directly giving platforms to some of these H-pop singers, roping them in as campaigners, different Hindutva organizations holding concerts and paying these singers to come and perform, or organizing concerts in places where they may not be able to do mass mobilization events, where they may not have experienced a groundswell of support. So what they would instead do is that they would get all of these artists to go and perform there, right? So a smattering of poets or singers would go and essentially echo the Hindutva line, but in songs and rhymes. And then that lays the ground for all of the other work that then would sometimes follow, with the Hindutva organizations then mobilizing on the ground. So that kind of chemistry and that kind of sort of close coordination is what we have not seen so far. And that essentially is why it's important for us to now then look at it afresh and look at it very, very carefully.
Sure. Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, there's clearly the social media, and I suppose also WhatsApp and all kinds of platforms are enabling a form of
Yeah.
circulation and a scale, right? That's very different.
Yeah,
I see
absolutely.
that. I see that. There are a couple of questions that are coming in, but I just want to ask you maybe one, just a quick question, which is, how do you see this? Does this also reflect in the film industry? I mean, we've seen this flurry of films, and lately, this film about Sambhaji and Shivaji's son, and the kind of controversy and the kind of sentiments that it also generates or allows people to project. Do you see some of this bleeding in, this sort of world of H-pop? Is it also bleeding into the world of cinema?
100%. I mean, in fact, cinema, I would think is one of the most popular mediums for Hindutva groups to now sort of look at and co-opt it, and they have been very, very successful in being able to do that. You look at films like Kashmir Files, Kerala Story, and so on, and they've been essentially able to take some of the most core elements of the ideology, repackage it using very, very contemporary narratives, be it in Kerala, be it in Kashmir, and then essentially make the point that they were always trying to make. And they have been very, very successful at being able to do that, because I think the level of mobilization that I saw after some of these films has just given us an indication that it is a trend that is now going to continue. I mean, you spoke of Chhawa, and Chhawa is just the latest example in a series of such films which have been able to do that. The other aspect, though, Thomas, about cinema is that, then this is where I talk of the mainstreaming of Hindutva pop culture as sort of, in somewhat ways not replacing the pop culture, the mainstream pop culture that we've known, but blending in rather seamlessly, which is that so many of these films are now creating music which is sounding very, very similar to Hindutva pop. So many of these films will have a track or two, which is essentially just sort of this very, very aggressive beats, which is music, which is targeting, this exact crowd of Hindutva right-wing groups, for the purpose of them making reels, for the purpose of them playing it in processions and so on. And the language that these songs often talk is the language of war. They talk of, taking down enemies. They're taking, and talk of sort of Hindus as heroes and so on, right? So without really calling out Muslims and without really spelling it out, they are very, very carefully, sort of doing the job for the Hindu right wing. And as a result, these songs get extremely popular both on social media as well as on the routes of these processions and so on. So they become a good sort of, middle path in some ways for people who want to communicate which side of things they lay on in processions or in college festivals without really them going the whole hog. And I think that is such an interesting way in which they've been able to also use this kind of music for their purposes.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So there are a couple of questions that have come in, and maybe we can bundle the two of them. There's one from Anu Mandavili about who are these pop stars, and are they male, female, where do they come from? Does it correlate with their popularity? Does it correlate with where BJP is in power, has a strong base? Or is it something that's larger than that? And there was a related question about the gender dynamic of this. I mean, I guess both the songs and the stars and so on. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that.
No, absolutely. So, in terms of where they come from, it's fascinating because as I said, I went to 7 different states and most of them in the northern, central, and eastern part of India. And of course, because I hail from Maharashtra, I also managed to cover that bit of the West. But almost every Hindutva pop star that I know of and whose music I follow, they're all coming from this belt, right? And this belt is a belt which is, as you would know, better than me, Thomas, has been really the bedrock of Hindutva mobilization for decades now. And so it's interesting that all of them hail from these states and from these regions. That's not to say that they're not expanding, because after the book came out, when I started traveling with the book across the country, what I also noticed is that when I would go to southern states, where you typically not hear of Hindutva mobilization as much, states like Andhra Pradesh, for instance, states like West Bengal, which has only recently in the last, say, few years or so seen this level of mobilization, I met people who told me that they had also heard similar songs in local languages, right, saying exactly the same things about Muslims and enemies and so on. So essentially what they've done is that they've created this successful template through which different artists are now picking up cues and then making their own, right? Making it their own and wanting to convert some of this rhetoric in local regional languages. So my fear is that it's only now going to broad base itself and travel in different directions. But at this point, as I said, most of the existing stars do hail from the northern and sort of the Hindi speaking belt as much. I have seen that it is predominantly male dominated, this space, and the caste matrix can be very, very diverse, as is the case actually with so much of the Hindutva mobilization that the BJP and the RSS has been able to do, in my experience at least, on the ground. they've been able to broad base, their groundswell of support that they see in so many states, and that reflects in the kind of Hindutva stars that they've also been able to capture and also be able to make big. So I see that there is a diverse mix, both in terms of the geographical mix as well as the caste mix. The gender mix, as I said, is largely still male dominated, and the women who do make it to the space. So Kavi Singh, whose thumbnails I showed you as examples, the woman who sung the song about Pulwama and now Pahalgam, she's an example of the few women who are very, very popular in this space. But the interesting part about the women in this space, Thomas, is that um, these women are also highly masculinized, so they're women who very clearly want to signal that they're strong enough. They're male like in the way that they're heroic, they're able to protect themselves. They're aggressive, so they talk of killing enemies, they talk of taking on enemies and so on. So even when it's about having women in this fold, the audience often only accepts those women who often portray themselves to be, sort of masculinized enough to be able to defend themselves, against the mythical Muslim man, who's sort of targeting them and luring them with lust and so on. So that I find is often very interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting analogies with what happened with some speakers, star speakers back in the 90s and so on and so
Yeah,
forth. There were also
yeah,
comments.
absolutely. Yeah.
So there is a question. We have a couple more questions here. There is one from Debdata Chakrabarti, and it is about the perpetrators. What did you hear from the perpetrators of the violence? You talked about Gumla. Are they owning up to what they're doing and they're celebrating it? Are they trying to hide what they did? How they're justifying it? Because you mentioned you talked to family members of victims, but also perpetrators. So maybe you can just spend a few minutes on that aspect.
Well, sometimes it's an unpopular thing to say, but I say this nonetheless because it stems from my grassroots experiences, which is that often the people that we think, I mean, they are perpetrators, of course, but often that the people that we think are essentially villains, the people who are, sort of these terrible human beings, are often victims of propaganda themselves, right? Are often victims of so much of this rhetoric that they believe, that they've completely bought into. And that is a recurring theme that I often face when I'm talking face to face with so many of these people, because they often believe that they've been used by the Hindu right-wing ecosystem. They believe they've been used by Hindu right-wing outfits. Sometimes they see the futility of it all only after the dust settles down, only after they've been incarcerated. So they see the fact that hatred doesn't serve any purpose. And yet, of course, they try and retrospectively seek meaning in what they do or what they did. So they often try and find ways of justifying their actions because they believe that they were acting on very real threats. But the point at which they differ is that they now buy into the fact that the threat exists anymore. So they believe that at that point the threat was real, and which is why I was goaded into action. But anyone who's now telling you that such a threat exists is basically lying to you. So I've often had people who've been very, very angry with the BJP, who've been very angry with the RSS because they believe that what they did, which is to lynch someone, which is to kill someone, which is to violently take part in riots which have burned down Muslim homes and so on. They were goaded into that moment of action, and yet as soon as that action was done, they were discarded and they were rejected because the BJP didn't want to be seen as being aligned with some of these people.
Right.
So they often have those very strong feelings against these Hindu right wing outfits.
Yeah, the deniability is always there, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
So we'll just take two more questions before we close because we're now at 11:10. So here's a question from Sritituti Roy. What kind of subcultures could effectively counter this kind of pop culture? Because anyone remotely critical of Hindutva elements online is branded as communist or anti-national. Propaganda is subjected to large-scale bullying and heckling.
Well, I mean, it's a question that, a lot of us keep grappling with, is to, just what will appeal. And I mean, look, the sad truth of matter, Thomas, and everyone else, is that Hindutva pop works right now because it clicks with the audience, right? It works right now because it gets the numbers. It is popular because there are so many millions of people who see the merit of that rhetoric. And that might be the harsh truth, but that is the truth. These numbers aren't lying. The kind of people that I meet on the street who know the songs. I'll tell you a fascinating insight about how popular some of these guys are, which is that when I was traveling with Kavi Singh, who's one of the characters, by the way, in the book, when I was traveling with her across different states, we go to the bank of the Ganges, and a guy recognizes her, and which is all right, because they get recognized all the time. But what that guy did next left me stunned, which is that he came up to her, he came up to all of us when we were standing there, and he said, "Kaviji, I recognize you and I respect you so much, and I almost worship you for the work that you do. So allow me to wash your feet with the water of the Ganges, because what you're doing is you're protecting all of us, right? You're protecting the Hindu religion." And so that is the level of popularity that you're dealing with, Thomas, right? So it's not as if you need a better singer out there singing a different song. I think the way that you counter some of this rhetoric is to essentially reiterate the values that the rest of the country stands for, the people who don't believe in Hindutva stand for. And I think somewhere in this battle, the people who don't stand for these values have just been silenced, right? And they've just accepted that this is all that exists, and none of what we believe in needs to be said aloud, because clearly there are no takers. I think we've forgotten to reiterate the values that all of us stand for, and I think that's the case not just in India but across the world, in the US with all of what you see, in Europe with all of what it sees. I think we people who believe in a different idea and ideology must stand up and reiterate and reaffirm these values, and I think that can be a strong counterculture.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a comment that also would resonate with anyone living through these times in America. Um, uh, so thank you for that. Two last, I'll just combine them and then we'll end
Okay.
here. There's one from Debdata again. Do you have a comment on the musicality of these songs? And then Anu Mandavili is asking, who are the producers of the Hindutva pop? Who's making money? So maybe you can, I mean, is it good? Does it have quality? I guess is one question. The other one is who is behind it? Who's making it?
Thomas, every time I'm working on a Hindutva pop piece, I wake up the next morning with that song in my
Oh
ear.
dear.
Right. So these songs are so catchy, and they just
Yeah,
get stuck.
yeah,
And that honestly, I mean, beyond my own experience, that is one reason why they're so popular, because they very carefully, and some of the singers through the book, and I record this in the book, told me how they don't copy tunes, they don't lift tunes from old songs, but what they do is they'll lift a small part of an old song, of a very
yeah,
popular old song.
right.
So when you're listening to this new age pop and you come to that portion, you're like, wait, hold on, where have I heard that? Why does that sound familiar to me? And before you know it, you know the tune very well, and then you're singing along, and you know the words very well, right? And like all good propaganda, this is also packaged in a way that it is bite-sized. It is very easy. It doesn't make very complex arguments. It makes a very simple argument. It just makes it very, very forcefully, and it's designed for all ages. So you'll have H pop songs which will sound like a devotional song, which is something that maybe your grandparents would like to hear. But you'll also have H pop songs which sound like songs that you'd hear if you're going to an EDM or a house party, right? So there are different ways in which H pop has also been organized and designed, which is that it's then used at different functions and occasions. So it can be used in those processions, but it can also be played in a car when you're driving to work. And I think that is that the musicality then depends on this vast sort of audience that it has. And so to quickly just answer the last question, Thomas, about who's making money, there are lots of people making lots of money, to the point where these H-pop artists also have agencies, like talent management agencies which handle them. And these agencies are based in cities like mine in Bombay and so on. So there's clearly a lot of money. What you'd also be surprised to see is that there are music labels, which are at this point YouTube only music labels, especially, but there are music labels which produce all of this H-pop. So they make all of these resources available to vast sort of number of artists, and then these YouTube channels, which are essentially these labels, just upload all of these songs and make millions and millions of rupees out of it. So they're earning very well, and unfortunately in today's India, hate is a very, very attractive proposition, and I think the whole of H-pop ecosystem realizes this very, very well.
Thank you so much for sharing
On
your.
on that positive note.
Yes, we always end the same place, don't we? Like,
Yeah.
yes. But thank you very much, and thank you to the audience. And I can only say that go out and get hold of Kunal's new book and read it, and good luck with your further work. And thank you for sharing this.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you all.